Welcome everyone to another video discussion of free answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. In the month of January, we are going to see GS2 topics with very much focus on prelims based concepts for our mains answer writing practice. In today's session, we are going to see topic of administration of special areas, schedule 5, schedule 6 and emergency provisions. Let us see the overview of those questions. We have three questions over here. The very first question is with respect to different types of emergency provision provided by the Constitution of India, and we have to talk about the effects of this provision on fundamental rights, federalism and finances. Now question 1 and question 2 have certain kind of similarities, as in they are in continuous thematic way. In the question number 2, we will be talking about a certain statement where emergency provisions have certain kind of negative impact and we have to critically analyze. So over here, we are going to connect the first question with second question, where in the first question we are talking about the negative impact. Then in the second question, we are continuing from that negative impact and talking about why exactly we still need those emergency provisions. So we have to critically analyze. So that is something for question number 1 and 2 to understand the entire emergency provision in thematic way. For question number 3, we will be talking about the 5th schedule area. We will be talking about the key features of the schedule area under 5th schedule and what are the issues pertaining to the schedule areas. So that is the overview of today's 3 questions. Let us start with the first question. Let us read the first question together. Elaborate different types of emergency provisions provided by the Constitution of India. State wide-ranging effects of these provisions have on fundamental rights, federalism and finances. Now if you see this question, you have basically two major demands. The first is with respect to different types of emergency provision, which will be encompassed in the heading 1 of the body, and second heading is the wide-ranging effect of this provision on fundamental rights, federalism and finances. This will be under the heading 2 of the body. In the introduction, you have the opportunity to talk about what exactly is an emergency, what are the provisions related to the same given in the Constitution of India. Then in the body with the heading 1, you can talk about different types of emergency provided by the Constitution of India, give little bit detail about the same to elaborate the idea what exactly they are. In the heading 2, you will talk about wide-ranging effects. So we will not be talking about a narrow, as in not specific to about some emergency. We will be talking about what all the impacts that can be understood from those emergency provisions on fundamental rights, federalism and finances. And in the conclusion, we will talk about certain balance, that we definitely have seen that there are certain negative impact of those emergency provisions, but we need to balance because of the national security. So that is the structure for question number 1. Let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, as I mentioned, we will be talking about the meaning of emergency and some constitutional provisions related to the same. Now over here, if we understand, emergency is a very extraordinary situation where the administration is not able to manage the entire scenario. So it is a situation where the administration is not able to manage. For the same, our constitution makers envisaged that there must be certain safeguards. So for the same, we have part 18, article 352 to 360, which encompasses 3 types of emergencies. So that is all for the introduction aspect. Let us move on to the body heading 1, where we will be talking about different types of emergency. The very first emergency we have is national emergency, which is envisaged under article 352. Over here, it can be declared based on different kind of threats to the India's security, mainly war, external aggression and armed rebellion. So these are the kind of threats under which national emergency can be initiated. And over here we have to also understand that it can be preemptively declared, as in before the crisis, to make sure that we have enough safeguards for defense with respect to this kind of threats. So that is with respect to national emergency, which is under article 352. Then we have state emergency under article 356. also known as precedence rule. Now this is something which you have to understand, which is activated when we see constitutional machinery failure in the state, when the administration of the state is not in sync with the constitutional demands. The article is activated where the center intervenes the state governance. So basically it's like the name itself, precedence rule. The third is with respect to the financial emergency, which is under Article 360, where proclamation is due to threats to the financial stability, where we have seen that it affects the credit and financial well-being, where center basically dominates the state's finances to ensure that the financial emergency is tackled. So basically these are the three kind of emergencies envisaged under Part 18 to ensure that the country can defend against those kind of threats. So basically this is the heading 1. Let us move on to the heading 2. Now heading 2 is going to be the second demand of this question, which is effects of emergency on fundamental rights, federalism and finances. Let us start with the effect on fundamental rights. We have seen that for national emergency under Article 358, Article 19 is automatically suspended. So that means that Article 19 is automatically suspended during emergency, which is national emergency. For Article 359, we have seen that President has authority to suspend right to petition for enforcement except Article 20 and 21. So that is something you can think about for the effects of fundamental rights due to emergency. The second is effect on federalism. As over here we have seen that through emergency, center dominates the state's machinery. So there is disturbance of federal balance over here. You can also talk about centralization of power during national and state emergency is visible through the kind of mechanisms that are in place where the role of center supersedes the role of state government. Then we have precedent rule empowers the governor with potential influence on the state legislature. So that is something which we have seen in presidential rule. So these are the kind of points which reflects that the entire idea of federalism is disturbed because of the emergencies. Next is with respect to the finances. As we have seen that during emergency, the expansion of executive's power, especially union's power, supersedes the state's finance authority. And presidential approval for the money bill related bills is also there when this kind of emergencies are invoked. This have direct implication on reduction of salaries of specific categories of the state, which is directed by the president. So over here we can see three kind of effects: fundamental rights, federalism and finances. So these are the kind of negative impacts of emergency that we have seen. So that is something you will encompass in the heading 2 of body of this question. In the conclusion, you can talk about that despite certain kind of negative implications of emergency, we have to understand that they are there at the first place to ensure we have stability, as in safeguarding the nation from any kind of threat, which we have already seen, either be war, external aggression or armed rebellion. So this is something you can encompass in the conclusion. So that is all for question number 1. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can briefly talk about what all articles are there which reflects the provisions of emergency. You can talk about the part. You can also define what exactly emergency, the idea of emergency is. Then in the heading 1, you can talk about the types of emergency, as it is the first demand of the question. You can list down the types along with the article and what exactly is the nature of those emergency. In the heading 2, you will be talking about the effects of emergency, as the question is basically asking effect on 3 aspects, which is fundamental rights, federalism and finances. You will be encompasses the same in that kind of structure. And in the last, in the conclusion, you will talk about that despite certain kind of negative implication, they are still needed for the stability and safeguard of the nation. So that is something you can write over here in the conclusion. So that's all for question number 1. Let us see question number 2. Now again, before we start the question number 2, you have to understand that question number 1 and question number 2 have certain continuity. In the first question, we saw different types and impact of those emergency. In question number 2, if we read the question, we will understand how exactly it is in the continuity. The emergency provisions in the Constitution of India seek to establish a totalitarian state where the rights and the liberty of millions of innocent men and women will be in continuous jeopardy. Critically analyze. Now, over here in this question, we will understand how to navigate when there are certain kind of directive words like critically analyze. So in question number 1, we talked about the negative implications of emergency. In question number 2, the question stem itself starts with a negative idea that the emergency have certain negative impact. Critically analyze. So when you have critically analyze as a directive word, you will be also talking about apart from the negative impact, you will be also talking about the rationale behind why exactly we need emergency at the first place. So arguments in favor and arguments against the statement has to be catered in the body. So in the heading 1 of this question, you will be talking about arguments in favor of the statement, where the statement is emergency provisions in the Constitution of India seeks to establish totalitarian state. In the heading 2, you will argue against, as the directive word is critically analyze. Argue against over here refers to the fact that we will defend why exactly we need those emergency provisions at the first place. So that is going to be the structure of the body. In the introduction, again, you can use the very first introduction that we used in the question number 1, where will we talk about the provisions of the emergency in the Constitution and what exactly emergency refers to. In the conclusion, again, you can talk about the balance. So over here, you will be able to understand that when you have similar kind of themes in the question, the probability of you using the introduction and conclusion the same increases. You have to think the entire answer writing program practice in aspects of blocks. So we have introduction as a block, conclusion as a block. Then in body, we were using 2 blocks over here. In the first question, again 2 blocks. Now, totality, you have mastered 3 blocks through practicing this answer. First block was about the types of emergency. Second block with respect to the impact of emergency on different aspects. And third block with respect to the need for emergency. So that is how you have to understand when you are practicing your answer writing for any themes. So that is the structure of this question. Let us start how exactly we are going to deal with it. In the introduction, as we have already tackled how exactly we are going to talk about the meaning. Emergency refers to extraordinary situation where the government administration is not able to manage it. We have provisions under Part 18 of the Constitution under Article 352 to 360. To make sure that whenever there is any extraordinary situation, those emergency provisions are invoked. But however, you have to put a transition line over here that such kind of provisions have negative impact, which will be the heading 1 of this answer. So let us go to the heading 1, where we will be talking about arguments in favor of the statement, as in that it seeks to establish a totalitarian state where the rights and liberty of millions of innocent men and women will be in continuous jeopardy. We'll start with the first point over here, which is going to be suspension of fundamental rights. So in past, we have already seen that how Article 19 is automatically suspended during national emergency, and President can order suspension of seeking the remediation of those articles except 20 and 21 of fundamental rights. So there are concerns with respect to the individual liberties, and this can be kind of understood as potential abuse of power during emergency. So that is something you can inculcate for the suspension of fundamental rights. Second point you can inculcate over here is potential for authoritarianism. As we have seen that how in emergency, executive has asymmetric power, which can be understood as a factor behind certain kind of totalitarian state. It undermines checks and balances and poses a threat to the democracy. The third point you can talk about over here, as we are going to talk about the totalitarian state, is misuse for political ends. We have 3 instances of emergency in the nation, 1962, 1971 and 1975. The 1975 reflected how those emergency provisions were exploited for political purposes. So that is something you can inculcate for misuse of for political end. And fourthly, impact on federal structure. We have seen the various instances of invoking of Article 3 56, which is presidential rule, changes the entire federal nature of the polity, and it raises question about states' autonomy and local governance. So that is all for the argument in favor of the statement. In the heading 2, we will be defending the emergencies, as in we'll be talking about argument against the statement which is provided in the question, as the directive is critically analyze. Firstly, we'll talk about why exactly we need them for national security and sovereignty. As emergency powers for prompt response to the threats are there, that means any kind of threat can be tackled through that kind of provisions, so it safeguards the national security and sovereignty. The second is prevention of disintegration. We have seen that how certain instances where certain places can have impact on the entire constitutional machinery. So for that kind of safeguard, we have emergency provisions where we can prevent disintegration, and also it maintains territorial integrity in the time of crisis. Third is with respect to the efficient governance in crisis. Again, quick and decisive actions are required during emergency when there are extraordinary situations where government need to ensure that they mobilize their resources and concentrate on those emergencies, and streamlining decision can definitely help with respect to efficient governance. And fourth, with respect to parliament oversight, we have seen that how the declaration of emergency requires parliamentary approval, and that is kind of a system of checks and balance of a democratic society. So basically, these are the kind of proof points you will talk about in this heading to ensure you give a holistic idea with respect to the directive words, which is critically analyzed. In the conclusion, again, you can use the similar kind of conclusion of question number 1, where you can talk about that there is a need for maintaining balance between the safeguarding of national security and individual freedom. So you can talk about that despite certain kind of proof point where the emergencies are required, we have to ensure that those provisions are only invoked when there is certain kind of necessity, and thus they should not be abused. So that is something you can inculcate in the conclusion of question number 2. So let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. So in the introduction, again, you can start with the provisions of emergency, the definition of emergency, and a transition line where you can talk about that how exactly it's in sync with the very first statement of the question. Then you can give proof points for the arguments in favor of the statement along with substantiation. In the second heading, you can argue against the statement so that you can cater the demand of the directive word, which is critically analyzed, give proof point and substantiation, and in the conclusion, you can talk about the balance between the emergency provision and safeguarding the individual liberty. So that is all for question number 2. Let us move on to question number 3. Let's read the question together. Discuss the key features of schedule area under 5th schedule. What are the issues pertaining to the schedule areas? Now, if you read this question, you will understand there are basically 2 major demands of the question. Firstly, you have to talk about the key features, which is going to be the heading 1 of the body, key features of the schedule areas and the 5th schedule. And the heading 2, which is the second demand, is going to be issues pertaining to the schedule areas. So if you structure the answer in the introduction, you can briefly talk about what exactly is the need for the schedule area under 5th schedule. In the body, in the heading 1, you talk about the key features. In the heading 2, you talk about the issues, and in conclusion, you can talk about way ahead to ensure those issues are tackled. Over here, you can cite certain reports or certain committees and their recommendations. So that is something as a structure of this question. Let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can briefly talk about the schedule areas under 5th schedule with relevant data. Over here, you have to understand that schedule areas, they encompass around 11% of the geographical area of the nation. You can understand the same from the map. Also, they are envisaged for the tribal population, which is almost 9% of the national population. And they are kind of envisaged to ensure that there is the element of autonomy and development of those vulnerable sections. So that is something you can start with in the introduction. In the body 1, as we have talked about, that we will be talking about the key features of the schedule area under the 5th schedule. So let us start with the key features. The very first feature is with respect to the fact that they are constitutionally backed, as in Article 244(1). It reflects the idea that those schedule areas are provided under the Constitution. There are certain aspects also that certain areas are exempted for those kind of expansion of areas, and we have seen that almost around 10 states in the country have scheduled areas. Second is with respect to the declaration of scheduled area. We have understood that scheduled areas are declared by the presidents, who have the authority to declare, alter and seize any scheduled area, and for the same they can also consult the governor of this respective state for any changes. Third point you can talk about is with respect to the executive power of the state and center. Over here we have seen that there is certain degree of executive power of extension of scheduled area in the state, where center can give certain kind of direction. Center, that is through president, can give certain kind of direction to the state with respect to this scheduled area. Fourth is establishment of tribal advisory council. Now this kind of TAC are established in each state with scheduled area, where the focus is on the welfare and advancement of the tribal population. Fifth is with respect to the law applicable to the scheduled area. Over here, the state is kind of empowered, as in the governor has certain kind of power to exempt or modify certain laws which are applicable or not applicable to the scheduled areas, where there are certain special provisions for the governance also. And lastly, with respect to the PISA Act. Over here we have understood that 5th scheduled area are exempted from panchayat related provisions, and for the same we have PISA Act, which is Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act of 1996, which is extended to scheduled areas with certain modifications. So these are the kind of features that you can encompass for heading 1 of question number 3's body. Let us go to the heading 2 of question number 3's body, where we will be talking about certain issues pertaining to scheduled areas. The very first over here we can talk about the comparison of tribal advisory council with autonomous district council, which are envisaged in 6th scheduled areas. Now we have to understand that they have different set of powers, where autonomous district council have different sets of autonomy and power as well. So there is certain degree of differences over here. The second is composition of tribal advisory council. There is lack of clarity with respect to composition, as the provision says that they should be less than 20 with 3/4 representation coming from the tribal population in the state legislature. So that is something kind of a vague, because we do not know what exactly is the composition for the remaining 1/4. Third is with respect to the governor's power. Over here we have to understand that the discretionary power of governor can be abused based on those kind of issues. Fourth is with respect to protection against land encroachment. We have seen that there are inadequate provisions to safeguard the tribal land from encroachment by non-tribal population. And lastly, we have to understand that the tribal population is not exactly segregated into only scheduled area. They are also dispersed to different areas, and because of the same, there is exclusion of 59% of India's tribal population, which they are denied for rights of significant percentage under the Article 244, and they are also exclusion from the laws applicable to scheduled area, including specific acts. So this is the kind of exclusion that we have seen with respect to this kind of provisions. So that is all with respect to the issues pertaining to the scheduled area. In the conclusion, you can talk about certain way ahead points. Over here, you can talk about that there is need to incorporate Haha committee and Bhuria committee, where we have seen that certain degree of autonomy has to be realized along with welfare. So these are the kind of points that you can incorporate for the first point. Second, we can talk about the expansion of scheduled areas to all habitation and groups where the tribal community is present, where they are also the largest social group regardless of their location. That is redrawing the geographical limits. So this is something which you have to understand as conclusion for the question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can briefly talk about the scheduled area under 5th schedule with relevant data points. Then you can list down the key features of the scheduled area under 5th schedule along with the substantiation. And in the heading 2, you can talk about the issues pertaining to scheduled areas along with the substantiation. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can give way ahead type of points where you can give certain recommendation of committees as well as expansion of these scheduled areas to encompass the development of tribal population. So that is all for question number 3 and today's session. Keep writing, and thank you so much.